Hello and welcome to the seventh session of the Schoolyard Forest Design Lecture Series. My name is Lauren McKenna, and I'm with the Green Schoolyards America, and supporting me today are Michaela Randolph and Allison Torres. Again, this series is part of the National Schoolyard Forest System, whose goal is to increase tree canopy and shade students from extreme heat. Related to today's topic, which is wildlife habitat in the context of living schoolyards and connected to schoolyard forests, we do have some resources on our website, some some living schoolyard activity guides, as well as an International School Grounds Month activity guide, and both have chapters on wildlife and habitat that include really fun lessons and activities that you can try at your school with your students. We are very excited to announce that a 2-year-long study has been published. We had a team of student assistants as well as other researchers and collaborators who looked at all of the public K through 12 schools in the state of California. We looked at all the schools individually to understand what tree canopy and shade looks like in the areas where students spend time. We also summarized our findings from the over 10,000 assessed schools, and we hope that you'll look at this summary. It also includes recommendations for increasing tree canopy for the most vulnerable students in California, to meet the goal of equitable shade across the schoolyard. The map itself is interactive. It's really great, and it allows you to explore every public school in California. Each school has info on enrollment and tree canopy. Just to note that there have been many other studies about tree canopy at schools, but we've specifically focused on the areas where students spend time during the day. We did find that less than half of the tree canopy, the current tree canopy, was in those areas where students can access them. So about 55% is outside of where they can access it during the school day. The median tree canopy in California in those accessible areas is 6.4%. And we do have a broad goal of 30% as an ideal target. So that's significantly less than that. We have a lot of work to do. And there are many, many students, 2.5 million students who have less than 5% tree canopy. So we hope that you'll explore that map. Knowledge is power. Please check it out, especially your own area, and use this information to help advocate for positive change. Many of you, of course, have already been doing this work, and we want to continue to highlight that. We have some case studies, so please check those out to get inspired. But we also have a link to submit photos and information about schoolyard forest efforts in your own area. And thanks to everyone who have already shared, and we're figuring out a way to showcase those schools and school districts. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Michaela, just for a moment to explain an exciting new opportunity.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Lauren. So my name is Michaela Randolph. I'm the Associate Director of Regional Programs here at Green Schoolyards America, and I want to share this exciting opportunity for you to work with us. Specifically, we are recruiting for a Regional Leadership Institute for school districts. What we're looking for is to work with school district administrators who represent facilities, curriculum, sustainability, and/or health as a team, and we're developing a cohort that really represents 4 counties as our primary focus: LA County, Orange County, Riverside, and San Bernardino, as our primary focus for recruiting from school districts from those 4 counties. If you are outside of those 4 counties, we do encourage you to visit our website to learn more about this program and fill out an interest form. But I will be honest that we are prioritizing these four counties. Uh, in terms of recruitment, we're offering up to $10,000 as a participation stipend, recognizing that it does take time out of schedules and a shift in priorities to participate in a leadership institute like this. But we really think this is an exciting opportunity to learn from peers within the region, have shared experiences, and also allow us to utilize our expertise and bring in experts to help you build more green spaces through a district-wide perspective on your school campuses. So if you want more information, you can reach out to me directly. I will drop my contact information in the chat. And again, fill out the interest form. If you work with a school district or represent a school district in these four counties primarily, and feel free to share this opportunity if you aren't a school district yourself with the school districts that you might be working with. So thank you again. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Michaela. Yeah, so we're gonna start with the series, excuse me, our session today. Reminder that these are going to run through the rest of 2024, the first Thursday of each month, same time. They offer guidance for creating and stewarding high quality schoolyard forests and living schoolyards. All our lectures are recorded. So on our website, we've got past recordings there for you. Our next lecture after today is Thursday, June 6th, where we will discuss maintenance and stewardship. Please invite your friends and colleagues. All right, so for today's lecture topic, we know about the multiplicity of benefits of the connections that nature have for students, young people, all people. But also connecting with nature means connecting with the wonders of wildlife, fostering curiosity, joy, and an ethic of care and connection. So in today's lecture, our guest speakers will review the importance of wildlife habitat in the context of living schoolyards and the potential that they have for widespread wildlife conservation and education. So we're excited to hear from the National Wildlife Federation, the Alabama Wildlife Federation, and our own staff today. Just as a quick introduction to our speakers, Allison Mathis. Sarah Ward is going to introduce herself. Excuse me. She is a program manager with the National Wildlife Federation in New York City, and she helped with many programs during COVID, and we do have a previous lecture from her. I'll drop that in the chat a little bit later. Allison Mathis is coming to us from the Alabama Wildlife Federation. She's an outdoor classroom specialist. She has a bachelor's degree in zoology and a master's in secondary science education. She has a goal of pursuing education in a career in environmental education. She enjoys working with schools throughout the state and planning and building outdoor classrooms. And she enjoys reading and spending time with her two dogs. And Ayesha Ercelawn, who is on our Green Schoolyards America staff, is our education specialist. She has taught and developed environmental education curriculum in school gardens for over 20 years, working with both private and public schools. She's also trained teachers from the San Francisco Green Schoolyard Alliance, as well as other organizations. She has a BA from Smith College and a master's from Yale School of the Environment and Ecosystem Science and Management. And this ecosystem perspective continues to inform her thinking. She's a longtime naturalist, which is why she's part of our team. She brings so much joy and expertise from that perspective. She also enjoys volunteering with local habitat restoration projects, rambling local trails, and pursuing her own sense of wonder in her garden. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah, who will kick us off. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll collect them for what time we do have for Q&A after all our speakers have presented. Thank you, Sarah, Allison, and Ayesha for being here, and I'll let you take it from here.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Sarah Ward, and I'm the Schoolyard and Community Habitats Manager for National Wildlife Federation in New York City. I work with school teams, with teachers to help design, install, and take care of what we call schoolyard habitats, and I'll tell you what that means exactly. But it's really great to be here, and it's great to be back from being here during the pandemic, talking about outdoor learning. So I'm going to get started. I do have sure. Okay, here we go. This is what I'm going to run through today. And I have a lot of slides, so I might not spend a lot of time on particular slides, but I want to make sure there's time for questions. So if I kind of breeze through something, please, ask me during the Q&A session. So the first thing I'll do is I'll tell you what I mean by a schoolyard habitat, how we define that. We'll talk about the benefits of schoolyard habitats for people, for wildlife, for communities. And then I'll take you through a step-by-step process that we have created to help school teams design and build schoolyard habitats. So first off, National Wildlife Federation, our mission is to unite all Americans to ensure that wildlife thrive in a rapidly changing world. We believe that in order to save wildlife and ourselves, we need to ensure that all Americans have access to clean air, clean water, safe communities, and equitable access to nature. And through our Garden for Wildlife program, we've been inspiring people to create habitat for birds, butterflies, bees for over 50 years. It's America's largest and longest running habitat movement dedicated to helping wildlife thrive. And our Schoolyard Habitats program is part of the Garden for Wildlife program. So through both of these programs, you can certify your schoolyard, your backyard, or your community space as an official wildlife habitat if you're providing the essentials of wildlife habitat, everything that they need to survive. There's currently over 10,000 schoolyard habitats to date, and over 300,000 certified wildlife habitats across the US. So I'd like to just start off by defining what is a schoolyard habitat. So schoolyard habitat, according to us, it's an outdoor classroom that provides habitat for wildlife, but it's also a space for the whole school community to learn, to gather, and to connect to nature. It can be designed to fit the needs and vision of your school community. You may call it an outdoor classroom, a school garden, a wildlife habitat, a living schoolyard. It's all kind of the same thing to us. It's really just this outdoor space that does serve all of these needs for a school community as well as for wildlife. We do like to emphasize and design specifically for those ecological connections between plants, wildlife, and people. So before we start to talk about, how to create a wildlife habitat, about the benefits for wildlife, I do want to just kind of forefront the social impact of creating spaces like this on our school grounds. So the benefits of schoolyard habitats or outdoor classrooms are really countless. I'll start off by saying, like, one of the reasons that we focus on schoolyard habitats is because not everyone has equitable access to nature. So we know that green spaces, including tree canopy coverage, and their benefits are not equally distributed across communities. And so that's particularly true in communities of colors and areas with lower income households. And so this has serious implications for public health, for quality of life. And because children spend a lot of time at the school, their schools can become places for them to access these green spaces or to access nature. Another reason to create a wildlife habitat is because the outdoors is a classroom. There's so many opportunities for students to engage with nature in a schoolyard habitat. There's so many opportunities to conduct community investigations in a schoolyard habitat. It's really a classroom for interdisciplinary education. It's not just a science teacher that can teach outside. We really like to focus on how social studies, art, ELA, any type of learning can take place outside. And as as we're all facing the climate crisis, it's also an opportunity to design real world investigations for students and to really focus on things that they can do in terms of climate solutions. So an outdoor classroom, it's really a space for the whole community. It's a place for teachers to gather. It's a place for families to gather. It's a place to connect to nature. And it's a place where you can really invite the rest of the larger community into your space for stewardship, for celebrations, or for learning together. So it's we like to kind of focus on all of these connections and how as an outdoor space can really be a hub for the whole community. And then we know that green spaces and connection to nature make us happier and healthier. And this is particularly true in children. We also know that their academic performance and their behavior can improve when they spend time in nature. So it's really just a win-win for everyone. And then finally, as I mentioned before, our schoolyard habitat or any kind of green space on our school grounds can really help our communities become more resilient to climate change. So as the picture on the left here is kind of what a typical schoolyard may look like in New York City. But when we design these spaces to be ecologically functional, we can start to mitigate some of the effects of climate change, including managing stormwater, reducing extreme heat, and really help mitigating some of the effects of extreme weather. And now, and also another huge reason to create a schoolyard habitat is because of increased biodiversity and providing wildlife with what they need to survive. Whoops. So because you'll be designing for wildlife, I'd like to spend a moment to talk about what wildlife need to survive in our gardens, in our cities. And the first thing that wildlife need is food. So food may come in the form of plants. It may come in the form of other organisms. So you're thinking about the whole food web when you're designing for wildlife. And I typically focus on birds, on songbirds, on butterflies, on bees, but you can design for any wildlife that lives in your region as well. So wildlife need food. They also need water, just like all living things. So it's important to include a water source in a wildlife habitat if you're creating it. Wildlife also need cover. So they may need cover from weather. They could use protection from predators as well. So cover can come in the form of dense plantings, of shrubs, of evergreens. So it's just a place to feel protected. And wildlife also need places to nest and raise their young. And we'll talk about some of those specifics. So pollinators are wildlife too, but I wanted to just, specifically focus on them for a moment too, because they can play a really important role in some of our forested spaces that we're designing in cities. So pollinators, just like all wildlife species, they also need water, they need food, they need cover and places to nest. So these are some ways that you can create space for them in your gardens or your schoolyard habitat as well. and we're talking about food for pollinators, it's important to consider their full life cycle. So pollinators will need nectar and pollen from flowers, but during their larval stages, caterpillars will need to eat leaves from specific plants, from host plants. So when you're designing a pollinator habitat, it's important to include both sources of food for them. And if I'm going to boil it down for how to supply food, cover, and places to raise their young, wildlife really, to create a habitat, you really need to add native plants to your space. That's really what they need to find food, to find cover, to find places to raise their young. Native plants provide berries, provide seeds that wildlife need to eat. Native plants can provide leaves that insects will need to eat, and the flowers, of course, for the nectar and the pollen that our pollinators will need to eat. And just to give you an example of how important native plants are, you can see that on this slide, I have that a white oak will support over 530 species of butterflies and moth caterpillars, so Lepidoptera. And a ginkgo, which is a non-native tree that's planted pretty widely across our cities, it will support one species of caterpillar. And so these plants, because of their high value for wildlife, we call them keystone plant species because they're critical to the food web and they're necessary for many wildlife species to complete their life cycles. So as one thing that I'll share with you at the end of this presentation is, I'll kind of go to, you can find the keystone plant species in your ecological region across North America. So these are the host plants that feed the caterpillars, and they're the nectar plants that feed both specialist and generalist bees. And you'll see that 14% of native plants support 90% of butterfly and moth Lepidoptera species. So if you want to support pollinators in your schoolyard forest or your schoolyard habitat, it'd be important to include some of the keystone species that support the moths and the butterflies during their larval stage. The horticulturist Jared Fowler has also shown that 15 to 60% of North American native bee species are pollen specialists. So they only eat pollen from 40% of native species. So you can find out what those plant species are in your region, and you can see how important they are to so many pollinators across your ecoregion. And I wanted to highlight another sweet thing that you can do in a schoolyard habitat or a schoolyard forest is this concept of soft landings that I first heard about this from Heather Holm, who's a pollinator conservationist. She's written several books about native pollinators and plants. And soft landings are these diverse plantings under keystone trees. So many moths and butterflies will complete their life cycle in the leaf litter or underneath trees. And so if your trees are in a sea of lawn, or you typically may rake the leaves away or blow them away or mow the lawn a lot, you're essentially ending their life cycle right there. But if you create these spaces under your keystone trees, the moths and the butterfly cocoons can land in these soft landings so they can complete their life cycle there. And I think it's just an important way to connect pollinators to a forested ecosystem as well. So sometimes we think of pollinator gardens as full sun and just buzzing because of all the pollinators that are attracted to the flowers, but this just emphasizes their importance for all of the species of pollinators. Another thing that's important to do in your schoolyard habitat is to practice sustainable gardening practices. So this means never using pesticides because of their harm to insects and wildlife, and also to children and people. You can create brush piles or leave snags up for that provide a lot of benefit for wildlife to find cover. And then even leaving the leaves, as we talked about, so, sort of like a soft landing there. And then also leaving bare soil for bee nests. So many of our pollinators, many of our bees are solitary bees. And so they create their nests in soil or in stems of old plants. So you can leave some of this up in your garden or your habitat to help provide nesting sites for them. Okay, so I might go through this a little bit quickly, but because I know I'm kind of running out of time, I set a timer for myself, so I will go here. So how can you create a schoolyard habitat? So we have created a schoolyard habitat planning guide that will walk you through this whole process step by step. And I'd say that the hallmark really of the Schoolyard Habitats program is that we want students to be the designers of these spaces. So at every step of the process, if students can lead that, I think it's a great learning opportunity. And they often have some really great ideas for what you can do with your schoolyard. These are the steps that you'll find. There's some flexibility in how you may approach your own schoolyard habitat. It really depends on the scope of your project. But it's really important to create a habitat team. So this is students, of course, because you want them to experience what it's like to be a landscape designer or a landscape architect. But it's also the adults. It's teachers from all disciplines across the school. It's custodial staff, it's parents, it's community members. These can all be members of your habitat team. And I'll quickly walk through the steps here. So once you have the habitat team, you can just start to do some visioning with everybody. Really talk about or imagine what you'd want to see in that space. Who would use the space? What types of wildlife would you like to attract to the space? And who can help us create this space? I think it's nice to just really don't put parameters on it yet. So let students and children just use their imagination in creating these space. Because then what you'll have to do as you go through the process is that students will have to understand the types of decisions that you make when you're designing for people, when you're designing for wildlife. So you can see that I love this one because the student wanted to create so much for his community, a fishing area on the school grounds, an all ages kid area. And my favorite was the hamster maze that they envisioned on their school grounds. It's also really important to connect to the community. So communities may have some expertise that they could share with you. It's great to incorporate any types of community wisdom. So you can talk to members that have lived in the community for a long time. Grandparents, family members can also really provide some really important cultural connections that you might want to include in your habitat as well. And then you conduct a site inventory, which is really just an assessment of the school grounds. So you may want to just focus on one area for your habitat, a smaller garden or a smaller space, or you might want to consider using the whole school campus. But there's a lot of activities that will help you walk through creating maps and landscape designs with students in the guidebook. You'll also really walk through the process of understanding how people use the space, looking at the sun and the shade, looking at the slope, like how does water move through the space. And there's worksheets for students so that you can just use right from the guidebook for all of this. And you're designing the space, which is really just understanding where you want to put things, how many of certain items you might need, what are the measurements of the space, what can fit there. It's nice to go through this process too, even if you don't have the budget or can't complete it until, or you have to create the habitat in stages, because you can really decide where you might want to put larger items like a shed or a pavilion. It's good to kind of know where they are in the space. And then of course, selecting plants, which is a really wonderful thing to bring students into the process of designing planting spaces. You can incorporate a lot of math in there. How big is the planting beds? How many plants will fit in the space if they have a diameter of 3 feet, 2 feet, etc. So, and then building the schoolyard, which is an opportunity to really bring the whole community together, to celebrate what you've done, and then to also create the space and understand how it will be used. And certify it as an official wildlife habitat if it provides food, water, cover, and places for wildlife to raise their young. And it's, as I said before, it's important to celebrate all of your hard work. And then, of course, maintaining the schoolyard is a really important component of building forests and habitats and gardens. And there's a lot of tips in the Schoolyard Habitats Guide, as well as like a lot of different templates that you can use to engage volunteers. And so these are some of the resources that I've mentioned during this presentation. So the Schoolyard Habitat Planning Guide, it's free, it's online available. The Keystone plant list that you can find for your ecoregion, and then some more information about soft landings, as well as some plant species that you can use in yours. Yeah, so I will stop sharing there so I can pass it on.
So my name is Allison Mathis, and I work with the Alabama Wildlife Federation's outdoor classroom program. The Alabama Wildlife Federation is a state affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation, and our outdoor classroom program, our goal is to provide technical assistance to K-12 schools throughout the state to develop outdoor classrooms or wildlife habitats for the teachers and students to use for educational purposes. There are 4 of us in the state, so I'm the outdoor classroom specialist for Central Alabama. We have 1 person who works with schools in South Alabama, and then we have 2 specialists who work with schools in North Alabama. So there's 4 of us that we just cover the whole state. But she kind of went through this already. You know, what is an outdoor classroom? It doesn't really matter what you call it. It's a living laboratory. It's a wildlife habitat. It's a space for students to be able to apply what they're learning in the classroom in an outdoor setting. So it's, you know, if they're going to be covering pollination or life cycles indoors, you might as well get them outdoors and give them a safe space to see it up close and personal. And then I'm going to go through, when we design and develop our outdoor classrooms, we include what we call outdoor learning stations. And this is one of those vocabulary terms that we use so frequently and we get so used to it. And our teachers get so used to it, but just wanted to kind of go through and explain what those are, because that's like the main component of our outdoor classrooms that we design. So an outdoor learning station is an area or a garden developed around a specific topic. It can be a habitat, it can be, you know, another educational topic, but it just gives, you know, a designated space for students to make observations, and it kind of has a specific purpose. And so here are some example learning stations that we include. Of course, the habitat ones could be like a butterfly garden, a songbird habitat, frog and toad habitat, pollinator garden. She kind of mentioned some of these as well. And a lot of these have dual purposes. You know, at a butterfly garden, you can provide habitat for butterflies, but you can also, one of the first grade science standards that we have is, you know, comparing adults to offspring. Do they always look the same? And of course, caterpillars and butterflies do not look the same. You know, in your frog and toad habitat, you can cover metamorphosis. So a lot of them have dual purposes. For the log decomposition station, studying food chains and food webs. And then of course we have other learning stations that are, you know, schools can pick and choose what they want to include. One of the ones that has become pretty popular lately is the pitcher plant bog. Alabama has an extremely high diversity of carnivorous plants, and not a lot of people in our state realize that. And so it's one of those things where if teachers know about that and they want their students to learn about it, they can kind of do a mini version of that at their school and talk about it. It's really cool that you can just drive south and there's fields of pitcher plants and butterworts and sundews and crazy little carnivorous plants. And then of course, annual gardens are another learning station that our schools can use and incorporate. Those plants would, get harvested and replaced every year, but teachers can pick and choose how they want to use those. George Washington Carver is a big topic in Alabama history. And he did a lot of research on like crop rotation and how to avoid soil depletion and all the nitrogen. And so some schools will do a George Washington Carver garden and grow the things that he was growing, like sweet potatoes and peanuts. And it's pretty neat to see that. And then of course, these learning stations can also be things like a weather station or a cardinal direction sign, something that's not necessarily a garden, but is still a great opportunity for students to make observations, collect data, practice, analyzing and, incorporating math or whatever you want to do. So that's when I say learning station, that's what we mean. And for a school to certify through our program, we have specific learning stations that we require for them to include. It includes a variety of habitat learning stations to allow them to better kind of divide out and teach the standards. But then we also let, of course, the more diverse your habitats that you're providing, the more likely there are for those wildlife to come in and visit, and the more likely your students are to be able to make those observations. So that's what our learning stations are. And this is not the full list. We do have a full list on our website of all of the learning stations. And we also have more information on like how we design each one and what can be included in each one and example pictures and everything. There's just not enough time to go through it all. And she kind of covered this as well. Why do we build outdoor classrooms? A lot of schools do lack natural biodiversity, whether it's surrounded by concrete or just surrounded by just all grass. A lot of times those natural areas, even if they have them, they're really far from the school. And so we're bringing these components of the natural wildlife and the native plants closer to, where the teachers can get to. It's really important to expose students to native plants and wildlife. And of course, it allows learning opportunities and teaching opportunities for the students to gain a greater appreciation of what is in our state and what, we do have a lot of biodiversity in our state. And so we want the students and teachers to feel pride in what we've got, and we want them to be able to use it for education. So the next few slides I'm going to go through are just advice for if you want to create an outdoor classroom or wildlife habitat, whatever it is. Over the years, we found certain things work and certain things don't work. And so this is just kind of a comprehensive list of suggestions, although there's never, a right or like wrong way to really design anything. You can just go with what works. But the number one important part that we have found is site selection. We always tell the teachers and administrators to pick a site that's centrally located. This is important for if it's too far to get to, we know teachers are crammed, we know that they're busy. So if you can't get to the outdoor classroom site, they're not going to use it. And if you don't lose it, you lose it. So that's what we always say, use it or lose it. And so picking a site that's centrally located, something that's going to be seen frequently. If you see it, you're going to be like, oh, I should go out there and we should do a lesson out there. And any students with mobility issues, it's going to be easier for them to get out there as well. And then if your site has access to water, it's going to make it easier to maintain those plants. If you do go through we've had some drought issues the last couple of summers, and so it gets a little hot and dry for a while. And so that's the biggest, when you're picking a site, you're looking for, can the teachers get to it? Is it going to be easy to access? Are there any rainwater issues, like she was mentioning the slope and everything? So if there are any rainwater management issues, can we incorporate, a rain garden or something in the outdoor classroom to help with that? We also always suggest, it is it's an educational space. So your outdoor education space is going to be different from your outdoor play space. And so you don't want to put it right next to your playground, because if you're trying to teach a lesson in one space and you've got, the playground is a play space, it's a fun space, but those two things might not work hand in hand. If one class is here and one class is here, it might get a little chaotic. So we always just kind of say, choose a space that's going to be a good educational area. This is just another example of where, it's centrally located. That's where it can go. As far as the size and layout, we've realized if you put different components of your outdoor classroom all over your school's campus, you are still providing wildlife, but it becomes harder to maintain. Maintenance is a big issue for a lot of our schools. And so if you can keep, think of it as a classroom, it is a space. And so if you put everything in one area and somebody signs up, to maintain it for a week over the summer, they don't have to go all over the school. They can just go to that one area, they can take care of it, and none of it's getting neglected. We don't want any part of the outdoor classroom to get neglected. And so a lot of our outdoor classrooms end up being around, 60 to 80 feet. It's just a nice little area. And we encourage schools to separate from surrounding environment using like a natural barrier with like native evergreens, or an artificial barrier like a fence, or some schools do both. It just depends on where it's located and what's around it. But that just helps kind of delineate it too, as like, this is the outdoor classroom space. And once we enter, this is what we're doing. It's outdoor classroom time. And so here's an example of, this is a giant courtyard that the whole courtyard is the outdoor classroom area. But then we've kind of tucked all of their learning stations up in the northern part of the courtyard. And then in the southern kind of part down here, there's just going to be native trees and shrubs and bushes, and they'll probably put some seating and everything. But that just allows it to be a space that's going to be more easily maintained, and it's going to allow it to be, used for the purpose that it's supposed to be used for. We also encourage our schools to include pathways, allows for any students with mobility issues to still observe any or interact with the learning stations, safely. It also allows, well, just any student to interact with those safely. They're not standing off to the side and like poison ivy or something like that. And it's good for classroom management. You can say, keep your feet on the pathway, don't stomp all over the plants and that kind of thing. I do want to point out, this school, they hadn't planted their shrubs yet, so it's not as barren as it looks in this picture, but that was the only good picture of a pathway that I was like, I don't have that many pictures of the pathways. But that's what we encourage our schools to do. And some schools will put down actual sidewalks in an area. Some schools already have sidewalks and we just build around those. Otherwise, we use crushed limestone screenings, and our local Vulcan companies will just donate those, and it's really cheap for the schools, and it compacts down like a sidewalk. And so it's really helpful for any students in wheelchairs. Those the tires can move across it pretty smoothly. And then we also, in the area that we designate as the outdoor classroom, we've started taking out the grass and incorporating more, we call them islands, of native shrubs and trees and bushes, because the grass is extremely aggressive and it can take over everything around it. It's not super ecologically beneficial. So it just becomes more of a headache than it needs to be. And so instead of having these little areas where you have to mow and weed eat and work around everything, we've just started replacing them with native shrubs and bushes and things that are going to produce pollen and nectar anyways. And it's helpful for the animals, and it also allows it to be a little more easily maintained by the teachers and the administrators. And of course, I mentioned this too, creating a barrier around the area. If there is grass on the other side, it just prevents kind of like or creates a windscreen, so that if there is mowing and weed eating happening elsewhere, hopefully those grass seeds aren't just getting all in the flower beds and taking over everything, because that can become a headache. One of the main things that we have teachers suggest or request when we are working with them is having seating throughout the outdoor classroom, whether it's benches scattered throughout so that students can sit and observe and just take it all in, or whether it's work tables nearby where they can pot plants, or a shaded instructional area. Some schools opt for all three if they have the space, and some schools pick and choose and divide and conquer. But that is one of the things that this is just a couple examples. We've had some schools just do little stumps for seating, or a little amphitheater style with a whiteboard, and then the outdoor classroom areas right beyond that. But that's just one of those things that when we get feedback from the teachers, having some sort of outdoor seating is key. We ask, what would increase your use? And they say seating. And then shade too. And we can incorporate, trees if they have the space to plant some trees to provide a little bit of shade. And sometimes if it's tight, or they have like utility lines or something under there that we can't plant a bunch of big things, we'll throw up one of those little shade sails. When constructing these learning stations or components, we encourage schools to use materials that aren't going to have to be replaced after so many years. So for example, we used to build our gardens out of lumber. However, down here in the South, those things fall apart pretty fast. It's just hot and wet and humid. And So we have kind of transitioned over to a material that's going to last longer, which we've been using retaining wall blocks. And so instead of a school, putting everything in and making it look really great and then having to rebuild and redo every few years, which can become a little cumbersome. Now they have these, more permanent structures where they can just trade out, they can trade out the plants and they can change the learning station to something else if they need to, but they don't have to rebuild the entire thing each time. We've talked about native plants, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it, but it is important. It's easier for maintenance. Those plants are acclimated to the environment. They provide much better food and shelter sources for wildlife. And of course, teaching about native plants is always great. But when you're planting these native plants, we've learned that it's helpful to kind of give each plant species a designated space within the flower bed. So I know at home, we just plant everything and it's all cohesive. But for an educational space, we've kind of realized that if you mix everything in, inevitably one of them tends to take over the whole bed. There's always just those little aggressive plants. And so if each plant has its own designated space, like if these are your black-eyed Susans and these are purple coneflowers, and you end up with a black-eyed Susan over here, like whoever is maintaining the area for that time knows that they can, pull that out of there. It's not a weed, it's just, it helps with the maintenance part of it, especially when you get people who sign up to maintain that may not be gardeners on an everyday basis. And here's just an example of what it looks like. So it's pretty cute. It's really cool. And it also allows you to stick a plant ID sign down in there for each species, which is our next, I guess, tip for designing an area is using educational signage. So each learning station, we have our schools, they can create, they can have the students create the images on this. We've had some schools have students create the artwork. We've had some schools do digital artwork for the learning station sign where it tells you what the purpose of that learning station is, having a plant ID sign to tell you about what plants are in there. And then we link all of our educational signs to educational web pages using QR codes so that if you're at the butterfly garden and you want to learn more about butterfly gardens, you can pull up a whole web page to learn more about it. And we've designed some web pages that are like kid friendly and teacher friendly, and they can use during their lessons as well. And we always recommend a rules sign too. You have rules in the school, in the classroom. Having rules in the outdoor classroom is also an important part of the outdoors educational space. So there's some examples of, they can change. These are just, we have templates available, and then the schools can really pick and choose how they want to design them, but we give them a little starting point if they need it. As far as maintenance goes, that has become one of the biggest issues for our schools. So we encourage classes to adopt out the learning stations. So if the whole thing becomes one person's project, it becomes a burden. Whereas if you're kind of spreading out and sharing the maintenance responsibilities, it becomes more of a community group project. And so, having one class adopt a learning station, that teacher can take their students out, get them involved, talk about what they need to do to adopt it. If there's things that aren't necessarily learning station based, you can, certain student clubs can, take care of watering the bushes and picking up trash and emptying the rain gauge, whatever it is. Same thing over the summer. Just having a maintenance plan in place is really important. Over the summer, again, it shouldn't fall on one person. Having teachers or students and their families sign up to just complete a little checklist for each week with like watering and weeding can be really helpful. Again, getting the community involved, master gardeners and extension agents are really helpful. Including it in the budget just to have, replacing mulch or replacing bird seed can be helpful. And I did just want to show, this is my last slide and I'll be done. I set a timer for myself as well. But our steps for developing an outdoor classroom through our program are very similar. But one of the most important parts is collecting and sharing information. This is where you're getting the teachers and the students and the whole school involved. Make sure everybody is on board with the project and get feedback from your teachers about what they want to include in the outdoor classroom or what would increase their use of the outdoor classroom or concerns that they have about the outdoor classroom, whether it's hot weather or whether it's they don't know how to teach outdoors or whether they're worried about their kids going crazy outdoors, whatever it is, getting some feedback. We work with them and kind of help address those needs or work with those along the way, work with the schools through every step of the process, evaluating the campus, developing their plan. And once you've built at least one part of your outdoor classroom, I'm sorry. Sorry. what happened. But once you've built one part of your outdoor classroom, you can start integrating that into the curriculum. And again, use it or lose it. So getting your students out there to make observations or do some nature journaling or collecting data, analyzing data, whatever it is. We have designed lesson plans that are correlated to our standards that our teachers can use, and we provide professional development, but there are tons of resources out there so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that was my quick little presentation that I wanted to go through, and that's it for me.
All right, thank you so much, Allison. I'm just going to give Ayesha a couple minutes to share some of our resources that we have through Green Schoolyards.
I think I'll just show you a few images of students actually using the habitat. As Lauren mentioned earlier, I'm the education specialist with Green Schoolyards America. And taught for over 20 years. So this is what it looks like when it starts maturing. And in this particular instance, students are having the very exciting moment of watching hawks. One hawk who has shown up and stuck around for a couple of days. And thanks to easily accessible paper and clipboards, and binoculars, we were able to do some quick drawings. So we also always have bug hunting tools on hand, as well as field guides to use these spaces for studying wildlife. And as I quickly became aware, what's really important is for students to have lots of access to different areas. So planting areas to be smaller in a certain way, so kids can get at it from at least a couple of directions, made a big difference for actually studying what was going on. And of course, it can all be then incorporated in academics, whether doing surveys and literacy and using literacy and drawing and math. Most of my examples are from elementary school, by the way, because that's the age group I was teaching, elementary and preschool. And you all mentioned about using pesticides, and we had students design their own as they understood more about food chains and food webs, and we'd hang those up. Again, another opportunity for understanding the ecology as well as some literacy. Different tools for studying the wildlife on campus, different sizes of magnifying glasses, outdoor microscopes, pluggable microscopes. And I think one point I wanted to say in terms of design and maintenance was a big thing we discovered was how you maintain these areas. Are there low-hanging branches that have been left for students to actually interact with the leaves, flowers, seeds, and associated bugs? It's very hard if trees have been pruned to so high up. There's nothing to touch except the bark or wait for things to fall. And I know that is a big discussion topic. Also, is there an understory for exploring? So plantings under the trees, again, at child height, and has leaf litter drop bin allowed to remain on the ground. And Sarah and Allison already touched on the habitat that provides. So also, since the reason I was showing you all those tools, the clipboards, the drawing, is it's really important right from the beginning to design for a storage space for these classroom materials so that teachers can take advantage of sudden in the moment, because that's what often happens with wildlife. You don't know necessarily that you're going to see birds, or maybe the sun suddenly comes out and your pollinators who need warmer weather show up and weren't there when you were checking earlier in the day. So plan for that. Plan for easy access, I suggest, and plan for areas that include the messiness of nature, because that is when it becomes truly good habitat for wildlife. So leaving the fallen leaves, the seed heads instead of deadheading, old stems are natural nesting areas for pollinators, as well as many other bugs and rotting logs. So what I want to take you to real quickly is some of our educator resources. So I'm going to just walk you through where that is. Lauren, is the website showing up?
Yes, all great.
Great, super. So here's Green Schoolyards America main website, and here's Schoolyard for System Library. I know our Living Schoolyard guides were pointed out earlier in the chat, but here's a bunch of toolkits. here's our educator resources, and I'm just going to point to a few things here. One is before you've planted, if you're thinking about engaging students in design, we have curated a collection of some things to think about and a collection of lessons to help students start thinking about design as well. For habitat, for example, they might map the whole school grounds doing geography activity using this activity called animal perspectives, or maybe create soundscape maps. So that again is on our main educator resource page, engaging students in design, and maybe Allison Torres can drop the link to that in the chat. Also, we have this big collection, just scrolling further down, trees and forest lessons and activities by subject, our in-depth collection. And I'm going to just choose grade K5 here because some preschool and 6-8 activities overlap. But just to show you, for example, this is by different subject areas. And within science, we have past plant structure and function. We have ecosystems as a subtopic. And again, this is a curated collection from many, many wonderful educators and organizations that focus on outdoor ed. So thank you to them. So for example, here's an activity you can click on that's specifically about leaf litter. High school and middle school have more advanced versions of this. There is a critter playground for younger kids, what you can make. Let's see, insect traps, a variety of ways. This is from Plant Heroes. If I scroll down, thanks to them, different kinds of traps. And this goes back to many science and engineering practices. And let's see, and if anybody wants some scaffolding with their students, Who's Been in the Forest has a little worksheet, and students can, especially if they're working with a teacher who isn't sure what to look for, point to either. There's a little worksheet of different things they might go looking for, including always you need an option of something else, and a space for speculation on what it was. So that is called Who's Been in the Forest. That was science. I know I'm zooming through this really fast. Last one I'll show you is in the social sciences. You can map your school grounds from animal perspectives. I want to open that right now. That's by Evergreen. And you can, what's really also fun is to do sound maps. This particular example is from John Muir Laws, a nature journaler, and you are trying to understand your habitat just using the sense of sound with you in the center. So here's an example. Birds are off in that direction, hearing the creek in this direction, hearing an airplane, and many more visuals on that. So just wanted to share some of that. And that again is all under our educator resources, which is under resources.
Thank you so much, Ayesha.
Absolutely. Sorry to speed through there so fast.
That was great. And we find that there's just so much information. 1 hour is not enough for any of these sessions. So thank you for your patience. Thank you, Allison, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. And go outside, listen to the birds, look at the trees, and encourage your students and the young people in your life to do the same. Thanks, everyone.